Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where every week I and my good friend Stilgar each take turns coming up with a topic from history that the other person doesn't know about and quite probably hasn't heard about. And my name is Ivor Kovac, and today it is my turn. So today I've got somebody that you probably have heard about. I'm sure you've heard of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty much, I think most people have, anybody who is listening to our channel for certain. So this is actually a user request from Marco Kaz is his name. And he had put this request on our YouTube channel. So he asked us to cover something either from the period of the French Revolution or the Napoleonic era. So I chose to do something about Napoleon. And for my topic today, it's going to be the campaign in Russia and why the French lost this campaign. And so what I did...
I know. I'm curious to see if there's anything I don't know yet, because
yeah, you probably know.
It's something that's it's often like used also like when people are talking about Hitler's campaign into Russia, similarities there. So
yes, and actually, those were two. That was also on my mind when I was doing this. You know, that's part of the reason why I chose this, because Hitler also had a problem with Russia, and there's different reasons for it, but today we're just going to talk about Napoleon. And it's interesting because, as far as I know, the only people group to ever wholesale conquer Russia, to ever succeed, was the Mongols. And one thing about the Mongols is they came from an environment that's even tougher than what the Russians have to deal with. So that was probably a factor, and also their mobility. And so when I talk about this, mobilities...
And they came to the back door.
They came to the back door, yeah. Yeah.
It's the ass of Russia they came through. No, anyway.
Oh, man. Okay.
You know, it's not like it's Siberia. Like, you know, it's like all the great cities of Russia are west. So,
yeah. Yes, that's right. And actually, another topic which we might do sometime could be the expansion of Russia, like how it got so big and eventually went all the way to the Pacific Ocean and Alaska. You know, they owned Alaska for a while too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we probably do a topic about why the heck they gave up Alaska. Like,
money.
Yeah, I know, but in hindsight, it was a really bad deal, right?
Well, today it is, but that's only because oil that was discovered there later on.
Yeah.
Which, you know, today we're not allowed to drill, but it is worth a lot, Alaska. But it's not a nice place to... Well, I shouldn't say it's not a nice place to live.
For strategic reasons, it would have been really helpful, I guess, to Russia. Imagine Russia having, you know, like naval bases and military bases in Alaska right now.
Yeah, they might have won the Cold War if they had hung onto Alaska. You know, it'd be a different story for sure. Maybe they would even annex.
I know you need to get back to Napoleon soon, but I just read the other day again that apparently Russia is the only army in the world that has a polar military unit that is focused squarely and only on fighting on the North Pole.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the shortest distance between the U.S. and Russia, it's not over the ocean; it's over the North Pole.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that actually. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. But for now,
it might play into your story, because fighting in the cold, I imagine, will also be part of the story. Yeah.
Actually, it's going to play into another topic that I have planned that I've been brewing for a while, but I don't want to spoil that. So anyway, let's get back to Napoleon. So what I want to do first is just drop some facts about Napoleon. So basically, Napoleon, he lived from 1769 to 1821. He was born in Corsica, which is a French holding, but it's not full of French people. And if you recall from my Iceman topic, those people are a pre-Indo-European population that was later on kind of Europeanized, if that's a word. And no, their language is mainly Italian, I'm pretty sure. But Napoleon, he spoke French as a second language. So he was born in Corsica, and he learned French when he went to school in mainland France. And he graduated from the French Military Academy in 1785. And the French Revolution ran from 1789 to 1799. And Napoleon is actually what ended the French Revolution, which is something I actually like about him. Kind of gave me a positive view of him, for doing that. And he rose up through the French army during the revolution and seized power in 1799. And that's when he puts an end to all the madness.
Yeah, he ended the cult of reason.
Yeah.
It was
like
a cult based on reason, so-called reason. Science.
Yeah, it's an old, it's a recurring
Yeah.
tactic. Like, we are anti-bad guy, so if you don't like us, you must be pro-bad guy. Like, no, you can call yourself that, whatever you want, but you're still a bad guy. But anyways.
Yeah, or like, in the name of science, we're gonna behead thousands of people. So.
In the name of kindness, we're going to. Anyway, let's go on. So I gotta watch myself. So in 1803 is when Napoleon sells the Louisiana Territory to the United States in order to pay for his war efforts. He didn't care that much about this part of the world. And he actually, he held on to Haiti because that was worth some money for them. Declares himself Emperor of France in 1804. From 1803 to 1815, there are the Napoleonic Wars, which are basically wars of expansion, acquiring new territory. In 1805, October 1805, the English wipe out Napoleon's fleet, his navy, in the Battle of Trafalgar. And December 1805, Napoleon defeats the Austrians and Russians in the Battle of Austerlitz. And this, no way I can go into all his battles and details in one video, but I want to get to Russia. So the Treaty of Russia, all right? So it's important, though, that Napoleon lost to the English, who had the biggest and deadliest fleet in the world during this time, as I mentioned, in that other video about.
But that was a naval battle. That's on land, he was like unbeatable, right, for the longest time.
For the most, up until this time, yes. So what he does, though, is he can't get the English by sea, so he institutes something called the Continental System, which was an attempt to block England from trading in any seaports in mainland Europe. And in 1807, Napoleon defeats the Russians in Friedland, Prussia, which I'm not quite sure what country that corresponds to today, but I'll include a map. And then
northern Germany, because Prussia is, I think, Berlin is like the heartland of where Prussia started. Although it could be in Poland, I know
that there was German populations up near the Baltic, and that was part of what formed Prussia. But I'll say more about that as we go on. So Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I signed the Treaty of Tilsit in 1809, which divides up Eastern Europe, including Poland. And the Tsar agrees to join the Continental System against England. So he's trying to hurt the English economically, is what he's trying to do. And Russia, as part of this treaty, Russia agrees to end their aggression with the Ottomans and give up Mediterranean holdings. For some reason, Napoleon didn't want the Russians to have warm water ports in the Mediterranean. Like he would rather the Ottomans be there, which, you know, I don't know.
Which is actually something that you still hear today.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of prejudice, it seems, between Western Europe and Russia, which I've never been able to share in, probably because my origins are Slavic, so I'm more sympathetic that way anyways. But anyways, it's gonna.
A lot of wars have been fought with the Russians over warm water ports for some reason. So.
And you know, a lot of what the Germans have done, their aggression historically has, and moving south, has been to get warm water ports as well. Of course, the Germans also lose most of those, you know. But let's okay, so let's continue with this one. So Alexander I, or Alexander the First, he wants to take Moldavia and Wallachia from the Ottomans, and he also wanted to eventually take back Constantinople from them. And Napoleon, you know, he doesn't want them to do that, any of that stuff. So the Russian nobles and merchants, you know, the Russians are agreeing to all these terms anyways, but the Russian nobles and merchants, who are the richest people, they are suffering from this continental system because the trade with England was actually more valuable to them than the trade with France. So they didn't like it. And, you know, Napoleon senses that things are kind of going the wrong way for him. The Russians don't like it. So he says, okay, go ahead and you have my permission. I guess it's okay if you want to annex Moldavia and Wallachia. And in exchange, he wants them to help him defeat Austria. But the Russians only make token efforts, and they leave Napoleon to do most of the work. So when he gets into this conflict with the Austrians, the Russians just take a little bit of territory in the western regions of Austria, and then they stop. And Napoleon has to do the rest of the work himself. So then Napoleon wants to marry a Russian princess in order to cement ties with them. But Tsar Alexander's mother is totally against it. And her name was Marie Fedorovna, and she manages to stop it. She gets Alexander to just delay and delay. So Napoleon marries somebody else. And then the big issue is, again, the Continental System. And the Russians, they just decide to start trading with England. So by 1811, Napoleon thinks that there's going to be a war with Russia, and he starts to kind of move his troops into place and make preparations. He figures there's no way out of it. And it gets to the point where there's some gathering of different nobles and such, as some diplomatic meeting. And Napoleon, he comes across Alexander I and gives him all kinds of insults in order to provoke him into attacking first, you know, to defend his honor. But Alexander does not take the bait. Again, it just sounds familiar, right? And then in 1812, the Russian ambassador Kurakin tells Napoleon that Russia will reconsider joining the Continental System if Napoleon will establish a buffer zone between them and leave Prussia. And one thing I got as I was doing my research, and I heard something about this when I was in college too, is that the Russians didn't want Poland to be an independent country. Like evidently they had some problems with Poland in the past, some conflict that actually was tough for them between Russia and Poland. So we'll have to look into that. But they didn't want there to be an independent Poland. So then Napoleon.
That also still echoes to today, because I think the Ukrainians in the western part, I think, are also linked to the Polish people culturally and linguistically, whereas in the east they speak Russian and they're tied to Russian people.
Yeah, a lot of the borders in, you know, one thing that people complain a lot about Africa is that the borders were deliberately drawn to include multiple people groups and therefore break down cohesion. And a lot of people say it was a deliberate act of sabotage by Europeans to keep Africa weak. But a lot of countries in Europe are also not drawn along ethnic lines. Like most countries in Europe are multi-ethnic. So that whole conflict that's going on now, that issue with between Ukraine and Russia, well, the problem is that the border was not drawn based along ethnic lines. It was an
Yeah.
arbitrary border, and you had
If you look
Russians.
at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that had, the Hungarians, it had Slovenians, it had Czechia people, it had a lot of different people groups in there as well. So, yeah, I mean, borders were not determined by ethnicity for the longest time. They were based on whoever was more powerful and would take more land. So there
Yeah,
are parts of France where they speak German, and there are parts of Switzerland where they speak Italian, and parts of Italy where they speak German. There's all kinds of differences. Yeah, definitely
yeah.
agree.
So it's most countries in the world today are not drawn up along ethnic lines, and that's because the borders are usually the average person usually doesn't get a say in what's being done and where they would like their borders to be, and it's all probably always going to be an issue. But
Yeah.
uh, so that's and of course Napoleon, he didn't respect. He's just like, I'm going to take everything over that I want. So he decides he must attack Russia, and before he thinks that it's going to happen war no matter what. So he starts mobilizing on in January of 1812, and his idea is that this war is going to be over quickly. He thinks he's going to have a quick fight with the Russian forces and overpower them, and then Alexander will surrender, and he can be made to do whatever Napoleon wants. Of course, that's not what happens. So Napoleon, though, before he goes into Russia, he reads every book that he can get his hands on that talks about Russia. And he also researches an earlier campaign conducted by Charles VII of Sweden, who attacked Russia in 1709 and failed. So he looks at the reasons for why that didn't work. And that was something I'd never heard of before. Have you heard of that?
No, but it doesn't surprise me because
Yeah.
there are cultural ties there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So Napoleon thinks that he's going to need 500,000 troops on the front lines, backed up by additional troops and in the rear, and stockpiles of food and supplies, because he knows that going into it, there's going to be a supply issue. And then he divides the army up into three main army groups with two flanking forces, and he adds a second and third line of troops. Now, one problem I had as I was researching all this is that there are no exact numbers for most of this stuff, which is weird. So they usually say estimated or roughly or between this number and that number. It's interesting. So normally when Napoleon was taking over Europe, the troops would live off of the land because there was good farmland everywhere. So if they took an area, they could sit there and be sustained by it. And there were also good roads, or at least decent roads, that were paved with stone or partly paved with stone, so they could move the supplies along in heavy wagons.
Yeah,
And
because actually that was one of the reasons that Napoleon was so good is other than his preparation, apparently he only slept a couple hours a night and really prepared as much as he could before a battle, trying to read up on his opponents. But he was also very good at logistics. So yes, they did live off the land when they could to keep costs down and to be as fast as possible. But he also thought about the logistical supply chain if possible. So yeah, sorry.
no,
Yeah.
that's fine. So this time, though, he brings a herd of at least 200,000 animals
Mm-hmm.
for them, and then like cattle and stuff, and then a total of 25,000 wagons. And the wagons are a mixture of light and heavy, and so the Russians, they're commanded by this guy named Michael Andreas Barclay de Tolly, which is not at all a Russian name. And he's actually, back then when this was going on, there were some German regions that were part of Russia, And a lot of these German guys that were Russian citizens ended up becoming military officers, high-ranking commanders and such, because they were very well educated. And they were on average more educated than the Russians were. And this guy, he's actually of Scottish descent that moved into this region called Livonia and became mixed with Germans and became Germanized. So he has like mixed Scottish and German ancestry. And
there's a lot of migration from Germany to Russia as well.
Yeah, maybe we should migrate to Russia. We'll have to see. But yeah, the Russians, they had 409,000 men. So not quite as many as Napoleon. And actually, some other numbers that I saw placed Napoleon's forces at over 600,000. So the first problems that Napoleon's guys are going to have is that the roads in the Russian areas, which includes Poland and a lot of in Lithuania, some other Eastern European countries that were under Russia at the time, these roads are mostly dirt, and that creates trouble for the heavy wagons that are carrying like the greater amounts of supplies as well as some of the heavier artillery. The wagon wheels just sink down into the roads, especially with all the rain that's happening during this time of year. And before he even gets to the border that he's going to cross, there's a significant distance gap between the men and the supplies. They're not able to keep pace. And this is going to get worse as the invasion continues. So the war officially is declared on June 22, 1812. And on the 23rd, they begin to cross the Niemen River. And Barclay, I forgot to mention the other guy's name. So there's another guy that's like the second most important general after Barclay de Tolly. And his name is, his last name is Bagration. Okay, Peter Bagration. He's the second most important commander, and he's actually not an ethnic Russian either, but he's like of Georgian descent, I believe. So, let's see where okay, so the Russians are divided up between these guys, Tolly and Bagration. And Barclay de Tolly retreats towards Drissa, and Bagration retreats towards Vilna, so they just kind of fall back out of the way. And Napoleon cannot move his forces. He knows where they're going, but he can't move his forces fast enough to cut them off because of the supplies, lagging behind them. So eventually, the French, there's like when they cross the river, the Niemen River, there's not really any resistance from the Russians. There's a few Cossacks that fire some shots and then run off, and that's about it. And then the French, they reach Vilna, where Bagration has gone with his forces, and he fires the cannons a few times at them, and then he destroys the supplies and runs away and burns the bridges behind him, like the bridge across the river. And on July 18th, the French, I mentioned that, they reach Drissa, and it's abandoned. And then the next thing is the battle at Austra Novo, which is when the French catch up to Barclay de Tolly, and that's on July 25th through 26th. And again, this is another incident where there's a little bit of a skirmish, and Napoleon starts thinking, okay, great, now the Russians are going to sit and fight me. So he decides to hold off and wait for more of his troops to catch up, but Barclay de Tolly just withdraws from him further east. And the French, by this time, they've lost 100,000 men. And the reason for it is partly it's because of desertions. There's a lot of deserting going on. And of course, not all of Napoleon's forces are French. He's got like Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, Germans, and even some Poles included in his forces. And they're
Dutch people too. Yeah.
Yeah, Dutch people too. That's right. But some of these guys are not as loyal or as caring about the great cause as the French soldiers are, so they desert.
Well, they had no choice.
Yeah, I
So
would have deserted too, probably.
they were, they were just taken, and they had no choice to become soldiers. So, yeah.
Yeah, different times. Um, so the supplies, again, the supplies are not able to keep up with the troops. And then Napoleon, he enters a place called Vitebsk, and he considers just staying there to kind of, consolidate control over Poland and resume the war in 1813. But of course, he doesn't do that. He goes on, and there's his some of his other troops. Like, he's not able to personally command everything. He has some generals that were pretty good when he was in Europe. They were good about doing what they're told and carrying out his orders, but their ability to figure things out and solve problems on their own is not as good. So one of these guys tries to move on towards St. Petersburg. His name was General Oudinot or Oudinot. I don't know, again, with their names. But he is thwarted by the Russians, and he loses a lot of troops and gets hurt in the attack. And of course, Barclay de Tolly, he keeps retreating further east as well. The French will chase him to a city, and he retreats. So eventually, the French, they get to Smolensk, and they fight on August 16th and 17th. And during the night, Barclay de Tolly, he retreats and he leaves Smolensk. And at this point, he starts running into trouble because he's a German guy, and everybody knows it. And a lot of the troops and the Russian elites, they're like, this guy is not a true Russian, and that's why he keeps running away instead of fighting. So the Tsar, he replaces Barclay with this other guy named Mikhail Kutuzov. And of course, Mikhail, he still continues. They want him to fight and confront Napoleon, but he still continues with the retreat strategy. And then on August 25th, Napoleon moves out towards Moscow, which is 280 miles to the east of Smolensk. And he's still thinking that Tsar Alexander is going to meet him there and fight. Like, he can't imagine that this guy is going to desert his capital. So they have the Battle of Borudino on 9/7/1812. And the purpose of this battle is to take Moscow. And the Russians fight them for a bit. And they lose, the Russians lose 45,000 men, or actually at least 45,000 men. Exact numbers not known. And Napoleon loses about 35,000. And then on September 14th, the Russian army abandons Moscow. But what they do is they take all of the firefighting equipment with them. So this is where, let's see here. This is where Napoleon is really confounded, because he thinks that the Russians will have no choice but to defend their capital, or come and return and take it back. But they don't do that. They just let him sit there, and the winter comes and it gets very cold, and of course the city catches on fire and a lot of it burns down, and there's nothing Napoleon can do. And he actually had moved into the Kremlin, and he was sitting there, but he had to leave it because of the fires. So let's see what I have. Eventually he decides that it's not going to happen, and he has to go back and give up. And he's already lost all sorts of men, and most of the men that he's lost has been to disease and desertions. But as he decides to head back. That he's not going to win it. And on the way back, the Russians become much more aggressive, and they attack and harass them as they go. And Napoleon thought about going back by a different route, like further to the south, so that they can loot the farms that are there, because this whole time there's a serious supply issue. But what happens is the Russians, they force Napoleon and his guys to go back the way they came. And the Cossacks in particular harass them as they go. And the Cossacks, a lot of them were like light cavalry. And so Napoleon loses more men as he goes back. And when he gets back to Europe, he only has about 90,000 men left. And actually, he leaves the men and goes back ahead of them because there's some trouble in the French homeland. There's some dissent going on there that he has to go back and quell. So the Russian war was a great disaster. And the Russians, they kind of gave passive resistance, not much resistance at all. Like they wanted to lure him. As they lured him to the east, his supply lines got longer and more strained. And on the way back, also, a lot of his men, they didn't have proper winter clothing for the Russian environment. So a lot of the men just froze to death on the way back, and horses as well. And then they ate the horses. And sometimes, like if a horse fell down, they would just attack it and start eating it before the horse was really dead because they were so desperate. So the end result of this is it's kind of the beginning of the end for Napoleon after this great failure and this great loss of men. And he ends up actually losing his power, and he gets exiled to, where is that island?
Elba.
Elba. Yeah, that's right. He gets exiled to that place. And, he comes back later for a short time, but that's a different story. So that's mainly, there was a lot of different generals involved in this. And I may put the names of them in the slideshow. But, it's actually like way more detailed than I expected. So I didn't really have the time to go into everything in full detail. But one thing I learned about this time period, which I did not know previously, is that there was a type of heavy cavalry called cuirassiers who actually wore armor. They had like a full chest plate and a helmet. And their main weapons was swords. And their purpose was to charge infantry, I suppose, the kind of infantry that had rifles, because back then the rifles would take a bit of time to reload. And that those guys would be severely vulnerable to melee attack. Of course, the armor that they wore didn't stop bullets or cannonballs, but they would attack. You'd use them to attack while the enemy was, like, your infantry and their infantry are fighting. That's when you would deploy these guys, these heavy cavalry, and the armor that they had would protect them, I suppose, from melee attacks, from bayonets and such, but it's not going to stop a bullet. But it's interesting because I didn't know that during the, I thought by the 1800s there was no use of armor at all. I thought it fell out before the, during the 1700s. But apparently they were still using it on heavy cavalry who were still using swords to attack. Not lances anymore, but swords. We talked about that in the other video, William Marshall, a little bit, how that cavalry still continued to be used, but both the French and the Russians, they had this heavy cavalry that they would use. And actually, I have a picture of one there that I'll put in the slideshow, where one of these guys took not in this battle, but in one of the other battles, one of these guys took a cannonball to the chest. And they saved his cuirass, and you can see the point of entry and exit. It's pretty cool. So I'll include that in the slideshow. But that's all I had. Hopefully it satisfies our customer, and we do get around to all these requests eventually. So
I appreciate it. I already knew most of this. Not all the details around the battle. I do find it's interesting because, like, he was able to take Moscow where Hitler wasn't. And I think that was actually part of his doom, was because he was able to take Moscow, he overextended his lines too far or even further. He didn't plan to ever take Moscow. He didn't think he would ever get that far.
Yeah, and he thought that when he reached Moscow, for sure Tsar Alexander would not, that he would not retreat, that he definitely would stay there and fight down to the last man, but
Yeah.
no. And, winter was there. And the longer Napoleon stayed in Moscow, the worse it was going to be on the way back because winter is progressing and there were going to be food and supply issues.
And there's nothing to live off of because of the scorched earth strategy, where they just basically burned and destroyed anything as they retreated. So there was no food from the land they could live off.
That's right. And there wasn't that much food on the land anyways before that because the population was less dense. There was a lot more wilderness area. The roads were mainly made out of dirt. So it was definitely a different kind of frontier. And in addition to the scorched earth stuff, Napoleon's guys were looting and pillaging what little was there as they went. So that's also a reason why the journey back was so bad, as it was. And they tried to go back a different way, but it wasn't happening. And the Russians, they had all the correct gear and insulation for the climate, and the French didn't. So he kept gambling on the assumption that the Russians would stand and fight, but they didn't want to fight him in the first place. And then, of course...
No, so it was actually Mother Nature that ended up killing more people than anybody else.
Yeah, it was both, though. I mean, it was a mixture of the difficult climate, and also the Russians. They didn't outnumber the Russians by that much either, and the Russians did stop them, from. But it seems like as I was reading this, like they stopped them from taking St. Petersburg. But it seems like the Russian commanders, they cared more about the lives of their men, and they wanted to wait. They weren't just going to commit their guys to getting blown to pieces on the field. So that's why they retreated and they left stuff. And then, of course, when the French were vulnerable, that's when they came down on them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, and another, which is like with the coursers, like the guerrilla attacks as they were retreating, and they were actually destroying bridges and stuff, making it harder for them to retreat. But what I also find interesting is that the whole Blitzkrieg, which is, somehow the German invention, that's actually what Napoleon was doing as well. As part of his strategy was just because numerically he was sometimes even at a disadvantage, but because he was so fast, he was able to beat armies before they could join up together. So speed was part of his battle plan. But of course, in Russia, with the giant distances and the poor state of the roads, that didn't work as planned. Although, I mean, he was able to take Moscow.
He was also more cautious because there were a few chances where he knew where the Russians were going with their armies, and he could have cut them off, but that he would have been cutting them off without his supplies.
Yeah.
And he didn't anticipate that they would just keep falling back like they were. But of course, they were falling back purposefully because they were forcing him to extend his supply lines. So.
Yeah. And by the way, talking about different military units, he also kind of invented, if I'm not mistaken, the cannon artillery combination with horses, where they were pulled by horses so they could be quickly installed in strategic positions before the other armies could. And I think that was also a reason why he was so successful. And another reason was that he basically set up a meritocracy where his commanders didn't have to be of royal blood. Instead, he would just pick the people that were best suited for the job. So.
Yeah, and also the French Revolution had kind of driven off most of the people with royal blood anyways. And he was actually creating a new nobility in France. He was working on building a new aristocratic system, but with his own kind of people that were, I guess, more competent. One of his brothers was involved in this.
One of his brothers ruled the Netherlands as a king, installed as a king.
And another
Louis, and unfortunately during this time we lost some colonies, including South Africa, to the English. Because we were occupied by the French, and a lot of Dutch people were also sent to fight for Napoleon and never returned. So yeah. He was able to take Egypt, by the way, Napoleon, and he discovered, or one of his men discovered, the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, I read about that when I was doing my research, but I didn't mention it obviously. But I mean, it's true. There was not that.
The guy had a major impact on history, European history, like shaping all the laws over here, and spreading the metric system.
Okay, it looks like Jerome Bonaparte was the brother that he brought with him on this campaign.
Okay.
Was that wasn't this? What was the name of the guy that ruled Netherlands?
I think it was Louis. I think it was a Louis, if I'm not mistaken. So
didn't he also have a brother ruling over Spain?
Wouldn't surprise me.
I don't know.
His brother was actually quite popular here. Louis Napoleon was his name. He was king from 1806 to 1810. He was actually quite popular, and I think that's why at one point he took his crown from him, because he started to become a threat. So
Jerome, he actually didn't do that good of a job on this campaign, and when Napoleon chastised him, he just quit and left.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe not everybody was there but it seems like Napoleon I could be wrong, but my impression is that he micromanaged his army, because most of these generals, they were good at carrying out orders, but they were not that good at original thinking, problem solving. So as they got further away from him, they tended to bungle things, and I guess the biggest enemy was the distance between the supplies and the men. And the Russians were much more mobile and easier to move around. So, I mean, it's a good strategy. I guess they did the same thing to Hitler. When Hitler was trying to take over, they just kind of pulled back and let him have whatever it was. But then it was freezing cold.
They're trying to buy their time also. And they also, and Hitler also did the same thing to England, tried to cut them off with the naval blockade. Well, with the submarines anyway, because he couldn't fight the British Navy either. Which today Britain still has a powerful navy, and France is actually one of the few European nations that still has a strong and capable military. They're a nuclear power as well. But Napoleon is a really interesting guy. Apparently, he had a vial of poison around his neck, and when he was sent to Elba Island, he tried to kill himself, because he had been carrying it so long, the poison wasn't powerful enough anymore. So instead, he just got really, really violently ill. So that was pretty interesting.
And it's speculated that he died of stomach cancer. So
there was he may have been poisoned, but then again, there was arson, arsenic poisoning. Could have been the way that the English killed him when he was sent to St. Helena, but then again, that was in food, and it was apparently in the paint in his room as well. So it's not completely sure. They even had plans to send in submarines, like the kind that you talked about, that they use in the South to get him off of St. Helena. But yeah.
The French were trying to still get him back from St. Helena?
Yeah. But the English were so terrified of him, I wouldn't have put it past them that they made him do an Epstein, or it wasn't an Epstein, I guess. They make it look like they poisoned him somehow. So yeah, St. Helena is an interesting island, for sure. Like in the middle of nowhere in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's interesting.
They didn't want him to. I wonder why they didn't just straight kill him. He must have surrendered on conditions or something.
Yeah, they probably would have been scared of some kind of blowback or something if they killed him straight out.
Yeah, maybe some of their allies would have changed their minds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So some more interesting stuff about Napoleon. Apparently, he wasn't as short as people say he was. And he would disguise himself and walk around like his subjugates, or what do you call it? His
subjects,
citizens, and he would ask questions, what they thought of the emperor, just to try and get an opinion on them. So
That's what you call a direct poll.
yeah, I think
The Emperor Chen,
that's
Chen
probably a good
Shi,
one. Mm-hmm.
Chen Shi Huangdi, he tried to do that once, and he almost got killed.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, they must have. Although I think that was like a botched robbery.
oh, okay.
But he wasn't a popular and beloved guy like Napoleon was.
Yeah,
People hated
Napoleon
him.
was like brilliant and charismatic and like really unique kind of personality. And yeah, anyway, pretty cool dude, if you ask me. Even
Yeah,
though,
there's a lot we could say about Napoleon. Just this Russian campaign, like what I said, was just kind of a touching on the surface of it.
yeah,
There was a lot of generals, a lot of movements, mostly movements, not a terrible lot of battles, you know.
no,
But yeah, it's interesting, and I find that intriguing. You know, the attempts that, and there's people today, you know, that still want to have a war with Russia. And you know, if there were a war with Russia, you have to understand today, um, like without nuclear weapons, if you just waged a conventional war, I don't believe that you could defeat them. And you know, Napoleon had a big war machine, and Hitler had a big war machine, and they couldn't do it. And the Swedish guy also, he tried, and he couldn't do it earlier. And then, but you know, if you have a war with Russia today, it's not just going to be a conventional war. It's going to be nuclear missiles. I mean, and they don't seem like they really want a war, either back then or now or for most of history. It's just like, oh, these
well,
people,
I
why do they
mean,
want to attack us?
yeah, I
Like,
mean, like they were kind of expanding for the longest time because otherwise they wouldn't have made it all the way across. I mean, it's the biggest country in the world for a reason,
but they
and
had
that's like,
problems with those Tatars and you know,
yeah.
Muslims and other.
But they
So
were
I
also pushing on the Austro-Hungarian Empire's borders, so it's like they are pretty powerful, So that's people have been scared of them for a long time, including like Hitler was scared of Stalin as well, the Soviets.
part of Hitler's reason for concern was also that communism is subversive because it doesn't just spread by militaries and conquests. It also spreads by, I guess you could say, missionaries. You know, people that they send people in to kind of spread the doctrine of
Yeah,
it. And they also are able to find collaborators in any country that are ready to betray that country. And, you know, I read the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, and he went to World War One, but not, you know, World War Two. He was too old, but his son Christopher went, and they were writing. He was writing letters to him and such. And in one of the letters, he mentions that while World War Two was going on, the communists in England were handing out this paper called the Daily Worker. And he says, you know, I think we're going to be in for some very bad times, no matter if we win this war or not, because these people are handing out the Daily Worker and nobody is chastising them in the streets. They're just taking the pamphlets. It's not creating a row like it would have in the
yeah,
past. In the past, it'd be like, get out of here, commie. No, this is a, you know, so, and also like, so that's another reason why Hitler was concerned, is because sharing a border with them meant that they might try to subvert inside of Germany. Not that Hitler was a great guy or anything, or particularly much better than communism, but you know, it was a mistake for him though to do that too. But I think he was
to
probably
attack. He was. I think he was expecting an attack anyway. So I think that's why he double crossed Stalin. He figured he'd rather double cross Stalin than do it the other way, have it happen the other way around.
that's Napoleon too. He thought this guy's gonna attack me, so I may as well just
Yeah,
yeah.
they never did though. I mean, in the end, the territories that the Russians conquered were territories they quote unquote liberated from the Germans, and then they occupied.
They would have tried, like, I think they would have still tried to subvert Germany.
They probably
Uh,
could have, at that point, they probably could have taken the rest of Europe had they wanted to. to be honest.
They probably the reason they didn't was because the United States had dropped those nuclear bombs on Japan,
Yeah.
and they didn't know that we had used up all of our nuclear bombs. So
Yeah.
if they had tried to take over the rest of Europe, they were probably thinking, that we would use our nukes on them.
If it wasn't for nukes, I think when it came to tanks, they outnumbered the Western Europe by a large extent for a very long time. So, yeah, interesting guy, this Napoleon. So, anyway, cool story. Appreciate it.
Yep. So if you are still listening at this point, congratulations. And I would just say, if you like our content, leave us a like, and more importantly, leave us a comment. So far, we are taking up all the requests that we get. Doesn't happen right away because these videos are recorded way in advance, and they're also planned in advance as well. But we will eventually get to your request. So if you leave a comment, we're checking the comment sections. There's pretty good chance that we will respond. Although, if the channel does grow and get really huge, we may not be able to do everything. But for now, we've taken every single request that people have left us.
Yeah.
Yep. That's all I got.
I got one more fun fact about Napoleon before we close it off. Did
Okay.
you know that he wrote a romance novel?
What?
Yeah, he wrote a romance. He was a big romantic.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he was just burning with passion for power and military conquest. He was also hoping to conquer the hearts of women. No.
That's probably why he wanted to marry like a Russian princess, because he was hoping that he could, his descendants might then be able to claim the rights to the throne.
Yeah, but he
Probably
was madly in love with Josephine, right? Even though that wasn't like the best like fit for him. Like I think it would have just been for political reasons he would have married Russian princess.
Yeah, it
But,
was.
yeah. But yeah, no, maybe you could read up his romance novel sometime.
Yeah, that really surprises me.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it shouldn't. There's a stereotype about here in the United States. There's a stereotype about French people that they're big into romance. Of course, Napoleon wasn't really French, but
no, he's like the language in Corsica is more Italian than French.
yeah.
But then again, like the French, like the stereotype is also that they're not good fighters. But then, like we also know now from the Norman episode, they were, and like Napoleon, he conquered Moscow. The Germans were never able to take Moscow. He was very successful. And the French were in most of northern Africa, Egypt. I don't think they are easy to surrender. That's just a stereotype, mostly after the First World War.
Was it the first or the second? I think the Second World War is where they quickly surrendered.
Yeah, the Second World War, because in the First World War, their spirit was really broken. Like they were just so tired of so many people died. It was so horrible, especially for the French. So, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, interesting. Sometimes I think those stereotypes are just BS.
I think those stereotypes come from the English. It might have something to do. It probably has to do with like World War One, and World War One, World War Two, and the 100 Years' War, because there was a good period of time, during the medieval period. I think the late Middle Ages, where France was kind of like the weak man of Europe, getting eaten up by the English, and then also the Burgundies were rebelling or doing their own thing. But I'm not like and then Joan of Arc, she came and she made them strong, and then of course they betrayed her. So
yeah. Oh well.
Yeah. So I think that's probably what it. Yeah, I mean it's true, right? It's not fair to say that they have a history of surrendering. I mean they have done that before, but they actually have a history of conquest.
Yeah.
And we talked about it, quite a bit with Charlemagne and now Napoleon and the Normans too. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, and Napoleon did a number on the rest of Europe for sure.
Really good.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for listening, everybody, and see you in the next one, I hope.
Yep. All right.